Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is 6 Minutes a Day, a journey to your higher self. My name is Justin. Welcome to Strength, Yoga, and Freedom, our community where you're either listening to this via podcast, you're watching this here on YouTube, and you've come here because maybe you're looking to re-examine, rebuild, restructure some things in your life. And that's what we're doing here in 6 Minutes a Day. This week is all about mindfulness and working into what's going on in our mind. The first few weeks, and don't forget, if you are just joining or you have not gone back to the beginning, you can always go back to the beginning at any point, watch or re-listen to anything. In those first 10 days, we took stock of how we're feeling in the physical sense. So what is our life looking like around us? Where we became aware of certain areas of our life that maybe we want to make some changes in. We talked about how making some physical changes, like adding routines and creating healthy habits, can start to move us in a positive direction into our higher self. But we've now come to the point where we're going into the mind, which can sometimes be a little more tricky than the physical stuff. So let's get right into that and review what we discussed yesterday, which was on day 11. We were discussing anxiety. And I want to remind everyone that I am not talking about anxiety that is so severe that you are not able to perform day-to-day tasks. When that happens, or if you feel at all that your anxiety is so overwhelming that you do not or cannot deal with it on your own, seek out your medical professional for help and advice. This program is just me giving advice. This is not me giving any diagnosis. So we remember that as we move forward through all of the rest of this training, where we're going to be talking about ourselves and other people aside from doing physical things. So please remember, consult with your medical professional if the anxiety is so bad that you're unable to perform day-to-day tasks. And we talked yesterday, if we review again in day 11, about creating healthy routines. Anxiety can help us create those healthy routines because anxiety sometimes pushes you to make a change or make that switch in your mind that says, okay, now I have to do something about this because I feel the anxiety bubbling up. Those are the situations where we're in control. And yesterday I used the example of making dinner. Well, you know you have control over making your dinner. So if you feel like, oh no, I don't know what I'm gonna do, you can make a plan. That anxiety can help you. Where anxiety, however, gets us into mental trouble sometimes is when we're talking about things that are out of our control, like how other people behave or situations that we can't change right now. So that's where we landed with anxiety. And one of the areas that we're gonna talk about, or the area I should say that we're gonna talk about today, is fear. And fear is a situation and an emotion that comes up in all of us. And a lot of times, fear is triggered by situations that are also out of our control. So let's talk a little bit about fear. And I want to start off by saying this. Fear is the one thing that stops us from moving forward. It's one thing. It is the one thing that can stop you from moving forward. Fear is a trigger. As we talked about before, anxiety comes from triggers. When you become afraid of something, your anxiety starts to bubble up and you start to feel all those physical symptoms we talked about yesterday. Maybe it's the racing heart. Maybe it's the palms that sweat. Maybe you feel your stomach drop. Maybe your chest feels tight. Maybe you feel it in your back. You get headaches. There's all different things that can happen to you with anxiety. And of course, we know that loops in our mind can create panic attacks where the body gets so agitated that it doesn't know what to do and it starts panicking and you feel all those symptoms for a longer period of time. Fear causes anxiety, and what it does, the reason I mentioned that it can stop us from moving into a higher sense of self is because it leads to decisions that move us away from where we're actually going to go and into more of where we're comfortable. That's why fear triggers us, because it's a fear of we don't know what's coming or we might think something's going to happen. And so we back away from it and go with what's comfortable. Unfortunately, comfort does not lead to progress. Uncomfortable situations lead to progress. Fear is sometimes a habit. We are trained sometimes by external forces to feel something and be afraid. We're trained by others sometimes to be afraid so that we don't do something in their eyes that could be disappointing. That is a fear. We get that fear in our minds and start to loop that fear, and it loops into anxiety, which loops into not making progress. So we really need to identify the fact that when there is fear in our minds, we are not going to promote change by constantly backing up and doing something that's comfortable. So an example of that would be you're afraid of maybe writing a book or starting a book that you always wanted to write because you're afraid that it's not going to sell. That could be a fear. You could have a fear of talking to someone. Maybe you're interested in someone in a romantic way and you have a fear of being rejected, so you don't talk to them at all. You could have a fear of flying, like an airplane. You could have a fear of riding in a car, if you're not driving, a train, or even a roller coaster, and not because they could make you physically ill. There's a difference between if you go, in a car and it makes you physically ill, you don't do things that make you physically ill. But there's a difference between making you physically ill and just being afraid of how fast you're going, how high you're going, where you're going, because you're not in control. That's a fear. That's where flying a lot of times comes from, or the fear that the plane will crash or something is going to happen to that. That's where all that comes from. Again, situations you cannot control. And so another one, a big one, is maybe changing jobs. You may be afraid to change your job because you're so comfortable where you are now. Maybe you're making the money you want to be making, but you're afraid to make a change because you may not be sure you're going to be good enough in this other job. Those are all fears, and fears in situations of, quite frankly, situations you cannot control. There's some control in them, but for the most part, you're moving into kind of uncharted territory. And so what happens when you give into fear? I'll tell you what happens. Nothing happens. Nothing. Zero happens. You're just in the same place you were before. And so there's no growth from being afraid and succumbing to fear. None. Nothing. There's no growth in it. And it's a hard reality. It took me a very long time to realize that I have to embrace fears, face them, and keep going, because most of the time we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of not knowing or not being in control. And that triggers anxiety, which we talked about yesterday. So as we finish this up, I have a small challenge for you. For the rest of this week, why don't you just pick something you're generally afraid of doing? And I don't mean, it doesn't have to be a big thing. I mean something small, like adding on a little bit of extra spice into something you're cooking because maybe you're afraid it's going to be too hot. Oh, I don't know how hot that's going to be. Oh, maybe just add a little bit. Do that this week, one thing, and then next week, do another, and then another, and then maybe it's twice a week, and then maybe it's 3 days a week. Watch how doing those small fear-busting things turn into bigger, and suddenly maybe you're the one who has never wanted to step on an airplane, and you finally step on that airplane. Maybe that's what happens. So the rest of this week, we're going to talk more about worrying, and we're going to bring yoga into it off the mat and talk about how getting present, which we've discussed before, can really help aid in what's going on in the mind. So more on that to come this week. I am so glad that you have been here with us through this training. Share it, like it, pass it on to anyone who you feel could use it. Today, when you have taken that little step and it wasn't as bad as you thought it was going to be, smile and enjoy it. Enjoy the happiness because you deserve it. See you next time, everybody.